She doesn't know how to read or write, Your Honor. She's a countrywoman. She's going to get confused with the papers. Those words came out of my own son Julian's mouth, echoing in the cold courtroom like a whip. I am Eleanor. I'm 74 years old, and I have lived under the mask of silence. But today, in my old purse, I carry a piece of paper that will shake the foundations of his lie. The courthouse air conditioning buzzed like an annoying fly, crawling into my ears, trying to distract me. But I was focused. I was sitting on a hard wooden chair, the kind that makes your back ache after 5 minutes, with my hands crossed over my lap. My hands, spotted by the sun and warped by decades of scrubbing floors and wringing out rags, were the only proof Julian needed for his little theater. To him, those hands were only good for brute labor, not for holding a book, and much less for understanding the world. Look at him standing there in that navy blue suit he probably bought with the money I lent him 3 months ago and that he forgot to pay back. Julian was always handsome. He got his father's eyes, but that tight, lying mouth, I don't know where he got that. Next to him was Chloe, my daughter-in-law, scrolling through her phone with long nails painted a violent red. She didn't even dignify me with a glance when they walked in. To them, I am no longer a person. I am an obstacle. A piece of old furniture taking up space in the big house that my late husband and I built with so much effort, and that they now want to sell to pay off their gambling debts and luxuries. The room smelled of old wood and fear. I've always thought courthouses smell like fear. In front of us, the judge, a bald man with thick glasses that made his eyes look small, was flipping through some files with an air of absolute boredom. To him, this was just another family case. A concerned son dealing with his elderly mother's dementia. That's how they had framed it in the petition. Mental incapacitation due to advanced senility. Such big words just to say they want to rob me. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the judge said without looking up. We are here to evaluate the petition for guardianship filed by your son, Mr. Julian Vance. I was about to answer. I was going to say present, or good morning, just like the nuns taught me when I was a little girl. But my son's lawyer, a young guy with slicked back hair and a shark smile, beat me to it. Your Honor, if I may, the lawyer interrupted, making a theatrical gesture with his hand. My client requests that Mrs. Vance be excused from testifying at length. As indicated in the attached report, her cognitive capacity is severely deteriorated. Furthermore, and this is crucial regarding the management of her assets, the lady is functionally illiterate. She wouldn't understand the legal terms. It would be cruel to subject her to this. I felt a fire creep up my neck. It wasn't shame, it was rage. A red, hot rage I hadn't felt in years. I looked at Julian. He was nodding, putting on this face of deep sorrow, as if it shattered his soul to have such an ignorant mother. It's true, Judge, Julian said, and his voice trembled with a falseness that made me nauseous. My mother worked her whole life in cleaning. She's a good, simple woman, but she never went to school. She doesn't know how to read or write. She barely knows how to sign with an X or a scribble. If you give her those documents, she's going to get scared. It's best if I take charge of everything, for her own good. For her own good. How many atrocities have been committed in the history of humanity under that phrase? I stayed perfectly still. I remembered the weight of the water buckets, the smell of bleach that seeped into my skin right down to the bone when I worked at the State University. Julian was right about one thing. I worked cleaning. I was the invisible woman running the mop down the halls of the College of Arts and Letters at 5 a.m. and again at 10 p.m. What Julian didn't know, what he never bothered to ask because he was too busy being ashamed of my gray apron, was what I did during my breaks, or what I did with the books the rich kids threw in the trash just because they had a folded page. I never told him at first because I didn't want him to feel less than. I wanted him to study, to be somebody. I saved every penny for his textbooks, for his uniforms, for that private college he wanted so badly, because the public one was for poor people, he'd say. What irony. I scrubbed the public one and nourished myself from it. He went to the private one and came out hollow. By the time he left home, I was already alone. His father had died 2 years prior. The silence in the house was unbearable, so I sought noise in words. I enrolled in the adult education program at the very same university where I cleaned. The secretaries looked at me weirdly at first. Mrs. Eleanor, you want to study? Yes, I wanted to. And boy, did I study. I ate the books alive. I devoured history, grammar, world literature. I graduated with honors at 68, but I didn't throw a party. I didn't invite anyone. Who was I going to invite? Julian, who only called to ask for money. I kept the diploma in a cardboard tube at the bottom of my closet, tucked behind the old bedsheets. It was my treasure, my secret, my private pride. And right now, that secret was burning a hole in my purse. The judge looked at Julian, and then he looked at me. His eyes, magnified behind those thick lenses, showed a flash of pity. That was what hurt the most, the pity. He saw me as a defenseless little old lady, a peasant lost in the big city, a woman who needed to be herded like a blind sheep. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if I were deaf on top of being stupid. Do you understand why we are here? Your son says you cannot manage your assets, that the house and the coastal lots are in jeopardy, because you lack the necessary education. Chloe let out a nervous little laugh and covered her mouth. Julian elbowed her. They felt like winners. They already saw themselves selling my house, that house with the hydrangea garden I care for so much, to buy themselves a condo in a trendy neighborhood and a brand new car. I pressed my purse against my chest. Inside, my fingers brushed against the cold leather of my glasses case, and right next to it, the folded paper. It wasn't the original diploma that one was framed in my mind for now, but it was a certified copy, and something else. A letter. A letter I had written last night with my silver fountain pen, the one the dean gifted me when I retired. Your Honor, the lawyer said again, growing impatient. I believe it's self-evident. The lady is unresponsive. She is disoriented. I request that we proceed with the signing of the temporary guardianship immediately. My client is in a hurry. He has work commitments. One moment, the judge said, raising a hand. Mrs. Eleanor, I need you to answer me. Is what your son saying true? Do you not know how to read? The silence grew thick in the courtroom. I could hear the ticking of a wall clock I couldn't see anywhere. Julian was staring daggers at me, his eyes narrowed, transmitting a silent command. Shut up, old woman. Don't ruin this. Let me take control. It was the exact same look he gave me when he was a little boy and broke something, waiting for me to take the blame in front of his father. And I always did. I always protected him. But that woman, the selfless mother who let herself be trampled so her son wouldn't get his shoes dirty, had stayed at the courthouse door. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of injustice, but it also smelled of opportunity. Julian, I said. My voice came out a little raspy, so I cleared my throat and started over, this time with the steady firmness of someone who has recited Neruda's poetry in solitude. Julian says I don't know how to read. The judge leaned back in his chair, caught off guard by my tone. It wasn't the trembling tone of a frightened old lady. It was serene, measured. That is correct, ma'am, the judge said. He claims you are illiterate. My son forgets many things, Your Honor, I continued, without looking at Julian, keeping my eyes locked on the judge. He forgets who paid for his degree. He forgets who nursed him when he had hepatitis. And above all, he forgets that people are not statues. We change. We grow. Even if our hair goes white. Julian jumped to his feet. Your Honor, my mother is rambling. She's starting with her stories from the past. It's part of the dementia. She gets aggressive and confused. Please, let's just end this. "Sit down, Mr. Vance," the judge ordered with a strike of his gavel that echoed like a dry clap of thunder. "Let your mother speak!" Julian sat down, but he was red with fury. Chloe stopped looking at her phone and stared at me with her mouth open, as if I had suddenly grown horns. I kept feeling how every single word was giving me back a little piece of the dignity they had tried to rip away from me that morning. "It's funny, Your Honor. They say ignorance is bold. My son believes that wisdom only comes in expensive, shiny packaging. He believes that because my hands have touched bleach and dirt, my brain is dried up. He lied to you. He didn't just lie to you. He's been lying to himself his whole life to feel superior to the woman who gave him life." I leaned forward and unzipped my purse. The sound of the zipper was sharp and cutting in the dead silence of the room. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" the lawyer asked nervously. "I am going to answer the judge's question," I said, calmly. I reached in and pulled out my reading glasses, the ones Julian never saw me wear, because he never came to visit me. And if he did come, I hid them out of habit, just to avoid breaking the character of the simple mother he needed me to play. I put them on slowly. Then I pulled out the document, folded in 4 parts. It was heavy paper, good quality. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases on the wooden table in front of me. "My son says I don't know how to read or write," I repeated, running my hand over the paper. "He says I would sign anything because I don't understand." I looked up and pinned my eyes directly on Julian's. For the first time all morning, I saw real fear in his face, not the fear of losing money, but the fear of the unknown. He had no idea who the woman sitting across from him was. He had lived with a shadow, and now the shadow was stepping into the light. "Your Honor," I said, and my voice filled the room with flawless diction, pronouncing every consonant, every vowel, with the precision of a professor. "I would like to submit this as evidence, not only of my mental capacity, but of the profound dishonesty of the person requesting my guardianship." The judge frowned, intrigued. He held out his hand. "Bring it here, please." I stood up. My knees popped a little, but I stood as straight as a column. I walked the 3 steps separating me from the bench and handed the document to the judge. "What is this?" the judge asked, adjusting his glasses. "Read it, please," I asked him. "Read it out loud, so my son, who does know how to read, but apparently doesn't know how to comprehend, can hear it clearly." The judge took the paper. There was a second of absolute silence as his eyes scanned the printed lines and the official seals. His eyebrows shot up almost to his hairline. He looked at the paper, looked at me, and looked at the paper again. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Julian's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Julian was pale, his hands clenched into white knuckles on the table. "What's going on? What is that paper?" Julian asked, his voice strangled. The judge cleared his throat, adopting a solemn tone. "This document," the judge began, "is an official degree issued by the state university." Julian let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "What? A degree in what? A cooking course? Sewing?" The judge looked at him severely, silencing him with a glare. Then he went back to reading, and his voice rang out clear and powerful, reaching every corner of the room, reaching the deepest, most rotten corner of my son's conscience. In that exact moment, I knew the submissive Eleanor was dead. The woman standing in that courtroom was not a victim. She was a storm that had been waiting 74 years to break. And the first drop of rain was about to fall right on my son's head. "Mr. Vance, listen closely," the judge said. "The document certifies that Mrs. Eleanor Vance has completed the corresponding studies and is hereby awarded the degree of Hi. The judge took a dramatic pause, and I felt my heart pounding hard, not out of fear, but out of triumph. The moment had arrived. Bachelor of Arts in Hispanic Literature, with a specialization in the Golden Age, graduating with honors. Summa cum laude. The judge's voice echoed off the wooden walls, bouncing against the high ceiling and dropping like molten lead on the back of my son's neck. What was the only thing Julian could articulate? Nothing. His mouth was moving like a fish out of water, gasping for air, searching for a logical explanation that could fit into his tiny world of prejudice. Here is the seal of the Chancellor, the signature of the Secretary of Education, and the date from barely 6 years ago. The judge continued, slowly lowering the paper. Mrs. Vance, I must say, this is impressive. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, dropped her phone onto her lap. The dull thud of the device hitting her bony legs was the only sound competing with my steady breathing. I felt incredibly light, as if I had just taken off a soaking wet winter coat I'd been wearing for decades. It's fake, Julian muttered, standing up again, the veins in his neck bulging. It's a forgery. She probably paid someone on the black market. Your Honor, my mother barely knows how to count her change at the grocery store. This is procedural fraud. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. There was no more pity in his eyes when he looked at me, only a cautious, almost reverential respect. Then, he looked at Julian with the coldness of an executioner. Mr. Vance, the magistrate said with an icy voice, accusing someone of forging public documents without proof is a serious crime. And accusing a woman who just presented an academic credential higher than the one you probably hold is, frankly, pathetic. The petition for guardianship due to mental incapacitation is dismissed immediately. Mrs. Vance, you are free to manage your assets and your life however you please. Court is adjourned. The bang of the gavel was the final period to a sentence that had dragged on for far too long. I stood up without looking at my son. I gathered my things calmly, the glasses case, the embroidered handkerchief, and my degree, which I folded back up with the delicacy you use to handle a newborn baby. I walked toward the exit. I felt a sweaty hand grab my arm just before I crossed the double doors. Mom, wait. It was Julian. His tone had shifted. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was the little boy who just broke Grandma's favorite vase. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? This was a misunderstanding. Chloe and I just wanted to protect you. I broke free from his grip with a sharp jerk. I adjusted my wool cardigan, the one I knitted myself last winter, stitch by stitch, while he was blowing my pension on sports bets. What you wanted, Julian, was to bury me before my time, I told him, looking him dead in the eye, noticing for the first time the crow's feet carving lines into his face. He was aging, and he was doing it with bitterness. And speaking of reading, I highly recommend you pick up Time's King Lear. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two about ungrateful children before it's too late. I left him right there, planted in the courthouse hallway, with his mouth open and his hands empty. I walked out onto the street, and the midday sun hit my face. The city smog had never tasted so sweet. I didn't take the bus back. I did something I hadn't done in years. I raised my hand and hailed a cab. Oakwood Heights, please, I told the driver. I leaned back against the rear seat and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was starting to crash, and in its place came a mental clarity as sharp as a butcher's knife. During the ride, I evaluated my resources. Not the financial ones. I knew those were depleted by Julian's constant scavenging, but my internal resources. For years I had accepted my role as the little old lady. It's a comfortable trap. When you're old, you become invisible. People talk right in front of you, as if you were a piece of furniture. At the university, when I was wiping down chalkboards covered in formulas and conjugations, the professors would discuss their marital problems, their political schemes, and their deepest fears, completely unaware that the cleaning lady was right there, absorbing every single word. I learned a lot more than literature in those hallways. I learned about human nature. I learned that the one who yells is usually terrified, and the one who stays quiet is usually observing. I had stayed quiet for 74 years. When I got home, I saw it with different eyes. It was a solid 1960s build, with a stone facade and a front yard where my blue hydrangeas fought a losing battle against the weeds Julian promised to pull and never did. That house was my heritage. The sweat of my husband, Richard. Every brick paid for with overtime and bent backs. I walked in and the silence greeted me, but it was no longer an oppressive silence. It was the silence of a library just before opening its doors. I went straight to my bedroom. I locked the door with the deadbolt, another habit I picked up, when Chloe started visiting and snooping through my drawers looking for jewelry, and sat down at my old oak desk. I opened the bottom drawer, the one with the false bottom Richard built for me years ago to hide our emergency savings. There, wrapped in a red flannel cloth, was my true scepter of power. It wasn't money or diamonds. It was a collection of antique fountain pens. Pens I had rescued from the trash or bought at flea markets with my tip money. I restored them myself. I learned by watching tutorials on the library computers when the students went to lunch. I pulled out my favorite, a 1950s Parker, emerald green, with a gold nib. It had weight in my hand. It was cold and solid. I loaded it with black ink, a ritual that always calmed me down. To me, the smell of fresh ink is the smell of possibility. I pulled out an accounting ledger, one of those hardcovers with grid paper they sell at the corner stationery store. Julian thought I used these notebooks to write down recipes or phone numbers of my church friends. I opened it. The pages were filled with numbers, dates, and observations written in my flawless, round, steady handwriting. March 12th. Julian asks for $5,000 for car repairs. Note, the car has no visible damage. Saw him driving it the next day without issues. April 4th. $2,500 withdrawal from my debit card at a liquor store. Julian claims it was a bank error. May 20th. Chloe takes Grandma's silver tea set to polish it. Never returned. I flipped through the pages. It was a detailed chronicle of embezzlement. It wasn't senility, it was espionage. I knew exactly how much they had stolen from me, dollar by dollar, lie by lie. I had let it happen partly out of guilt, partly out of that blind motherly love that hopes the child will change, will realize, will grow up. But the scene at the courthouse had shattered that glass. By trying to declare me incapacitated, Julian had crossed a sacred line. He didn't just want my money, he wanted to void my existence. He wanted to erase my mind to justify his greed. I took the pen and wrote today's date on a fresh page. Today my son died, and a stranger with his face was born. The black ink gleamed on the white paper, definitive and cruel. I stared at the sentence. It was harsh, yes, but necessary. I had to separate my baby from the 40-year-old man who just tried to destroy me. I got up and went to the kitchen. I needed a strong tea to keep thinking. While the water boiled, I looked at my reflection in the dark window facing the backyard. I saw a short woman with white hair pulled back in a severe bun, dressed in simple clothes. But the eyes behind the wrinkles burned with a fierce intelligence. The invisibility of old age had been my shield, but now it would be my weapon. Julian and Chloe thought the courtroom show was over. They were probably at home right now, drinking something strong, telling themselves the old lady got lucky, that the judge was a softie. They'd think I'd go back to being the same docile mother tomorrow, that I'd forgive them like I always forgave them for everything. They had no idea. I returned to the desk with my steaming mug. It was time to map out the plan. I couldn't just kick them out of my life in one fell swoop. Legally, it was complicated, and emotionally, I knew it would be a war of attrition. If I confronted them directly with screaming, they'd play the victim card. They'd say I was aggressive, that the judge made a mistake. No, my strategy had to be subtle. It had to be academic. I remembered my semiotics classes, the sign and the signified. They saw the sign elderly mother and attached the signified weakness. I had to change the signified without changing the sign. At least, not yet. I picked up the pen again and started drawing a diagram on the paper. In the center, I wrote, "The house." From there, arrows branched out. Finances. Legacy. Julian's debts. Incapacitation. I knew Julian had gambling debts. I'd heard him arguing on the phone in the backyard, thinking I was deaf in front of the TV. He mentioned someone named the Turk. Dangerous people. If Julian was that desperate to sell my house, it was because the water was already up to his neck. If I simply refused to sell, he would get more aggressive, maybe violent. If I gave him the money, he would never stop. I had to cut off the source, but I also had to protect myself physically. I looked up at the bookshelf, where, camouflaged behind some old shoeboxes, I kept my books on Roman law and the civil code. I never practiced, of course. My degree was in literature. But curiosity is a vice that respects no disciplines. During my years at the university, I became friends with Martha, the secretary at the General Archive. She used to let me in to read old case files after I finished mopping. "Knowledge is power, Eleanor," she'd tell me while we shared a ham sandwich. How right you were, Martha. I started drafting an action list. 1. Total audit. Tomorrow I would go to the bank. Not as the little old lady asking the teller for help with the ATM, but as the account holder, demanding a detailed history of the last 5 years. 2. Change the locks. It was Sunday, but I knew a locksmith in the neighborhood, Patty's son, Bobby. He owed me a favor for helping him write his recommendation letter for the police academy. 3. The will. My current will left everything to Julian. That had to change. And not just change it, I had to let him know it was changed, without actually telling him. The fear of losing an inheritance is a much stronger motivator than love for people like him. But something was missing. Something more immediate. I needed to prove to them that the dynamic inside these 4 walls had shifted. The landline rang. The shrill ring pierced my concentration. I let it ring 3 times. 4, 5. I knew exactly who it was. Julian, testing the waters, checking to see if I was crying, if I was scared. I picked up the receiver slowly. "Hello," I said in a neutral voice. "Mom, it's me." Julian's voice sounded thick. "Listen, we're worried. You left so fast. Are you home? We're heading over for dinner. We're bringing pizza to celebrate that everything turned out okay, right? That you're not, losing your mind." The sheer audacity took my breath away for a second. Celebrate. He wanted to celebrate failing to declare me legally incompetent. He was a master manipulator. He wanted to get inside the house, normalize the situation, act like nothing happened so he could regain control. I looked at my green pen resting on the notebook right next to the ledger of his thefts. "Don't come, Julian," I said. "What? But Mom, we need to talk. Chloe feels terrible." I said, "Don't come," I interrupted. And this time, I let my professor's voice, the one I used to recite during my final exams, rise to the surface. "I have changed the mental lock on this door, son, and I will change the physical one tomorrow. I am busy today." "Busy doing what?" He let out a nervous chuckle. "Knitting?" I smiled. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, I am grading." "Grading what?" "Mistakes, Julian. I am grading mistakes accumulated over 40 years, and I'm afraid you are the biggest miscalculation in my ledger." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I felt myself trembling, but it wasn't fear. It was the vibration of an old machine firing up after decades of rust. My hands, those hands warped by rags and bleach, gripped the pen firmly. I looked at the wall across from me, where a picture of Julian's kindergarten graduation used to hang. I took it down. On that bare nail, I mentally hung my university degree. It was time for dinner. I wasn't going to wait around for cold pizza brought by traders. I was going to make myself a feast. I opened the fridge, pulled out eggs, cheese, vegetables. I cooked for myself, humming a song I didn't remember singing since I was young. As I diced the onion with surgical precision, I realized something fundamental. Julian had attacked the woman he times thought times I was an illiterate, weak-old lady, but in doing so, he had awakened the woman I had hidden away just so I wouldn't outshine him. Now, with the knife in one hand and my fountain pen in my apron pocket, I understood that the battle was just beginning. He had youth and a total lack of scruples, but I had something far more dangerous. I had time. The patience of someone who has scrubbed impossible stains out of marble floors. And now, finally, I had the pen to rewrite my own story. I sat down to eat at the head of the table, my back perfectly straight. The first bite tasted like glory. Tomorrow, the silent execution of my plan would begin. And the very first lesson Julian would learn would be basic grammar. He would learn the difference between being the subject of the sentence and being the direct object of my justice. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust floating in the air. Before, that dust would have bothered me. I would have run for a damp rag to wipe away any trace of dirt. Today, however, I watched it dance in the light like tiny particles of freedom. I poured my coffee into my porcelain cup, the good one, the one I only brought out for Christmas, and waited. At 8 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Julian's desperate, insistent ringing. It was two sharp, respectful knocks. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor." Bobby greeted me, holding his toolbox. "My mom said you needed a job done, urgent and discreet." Bobby is a tall kid, with huge hands and an easy smile. I've known him since I used to wipe his nose at the community daycare. Now, he's the best locksmith in the neighborhood. "Come in, son," I said, opening the gate. "I need you to change the cylinder on the front door and the back gate. And I want you to install a deadbolt, the kind that only opens from the inside." Bobby gave a low whistle when he saw the door. "Lost your keys, ma'am?" "No, Bobby," I replied, looking him in the eye with that new firmness that had been born yesterday in the courtroom. "The old keys just don't open the doors to my new life anymore. I want nobody, absolutely nobody, who doesn't have the new copy to be able to get in, not even if they claim to be family. Do I make myself clear?" The kid caught on instantly. In this neighborhood, people know things before they even happen. Patty had probably already told him the gossip about Julian and his debts. While Bobby drilled and hammered, dismantling the access my son believed he had by blood right, I prepared for my second battle, the bank. I dressed carefully, no housecoats or worn-out floral dresses. I chose a pearl gray tailored suit I bought on clearance 10 years ago. It was a little loose on me, but dignified. I pinned my hair back into an immaculate bun, and as a final touch, I slipped my emerald green Parker fountain pen and my rolled-up university degree into my purse. I didn't know if I'd need it, but it worked like an amulet. It was my sword in this silent crusade. The bank was cold and sterile, filled with that murmuring silence that smells like money and anxiety. I took my ticket and sat down. I watched the people. Old folks dozing off waiting for their pensions. Teenagers glued to their phones. I didn't doze. I pulled out a small volume of St. Teresa's Times, Interior Castle Times, and started reading, my back as straight as a rod. "Mrs. Vance," a female voice, called out from window 4. I walked over. The teller, a young girl with too much makeup and a bored expression, didn't even look me in the eye. "Tell me, Grandma, you here to cash your pension? Have your card ready. The line is long." "I am not your grandma, miss," I said in a calm voice, but projecting it that auditorium voice I had rehearsed in my solitude. "And I am not here to cash a pension. I am here to speak with the branch manager, Mr. Godoy." The girl blinked, startled by my tone. "The manager is busy, ma'am. If you have a question about your balance, I can." "It's not a question. It's an audit," I cut her off, resting my hands on the counter. "And I suggest you inform Mr. Godoy that Mrs. Eleanor Vance holder of preferred savings account number 4058, is here to discuss certain fiduciary irregularities before she decides to file a complaint with the Federal Reserve. The words times Federal Reserve times worked a miracle. The girl went pale, typed furiously on her keyboard, and picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, a short, sweaty man with a crooked tie rushed out of a glass office with his arms wide open. "Mrs. Eleanor, what a miracle to see you here! Your son usually comes in to handle the paperwork. Please, come in, come in." I walked into the glass fishbowl. The AC was blasting way too high. I sat down and declined the watered-down coffee Mr. Godoy offered me. I started by pulling out my ledger and my fountain pen. We are going to review the transactions from the last 2 years, and I want you to explain to me in detail how there are credit authorizations in my name that I never signed. The man swallowed hard. "Well, you see, your son, Mr. Julian, brought in the signed papers, since he is a joint account holder." "Was," I corrected, unscrewing the cap of my pen with a slow, deliberate motion. "Julian times was times a joint account holder. As of this exact moment, I want to revoke any power of attorney, any supplementary cards, and any access he has to my accounts." Godoy got nervous. He started stammering about procedures, waiting periods, and verifications. I listened to him in absolute silence, letting him tangle himself in his own red tape. When he finally finished, I handed him a sheet of paper I had drafted the night before, using flawless legal jargon I learned reading civil codes during my breaks as a cleaner. "Here is the formal request, based on the pertinent articles of the Banking Act. If you do not proceed to freeze the supplementary cards immediately, I will consider the bank complicit in elder fraud. And believe me, Mr. Godoy, I have a lot of free time to turn this into a media circus." The manager read the letter. His eyes widened as he took in the drafting, the technical vocabulary, the precision of the syntax. He looked at me, then looked at my simple clothes, my worker's hands, and looked back at the letter. Did you write this?" he asked in disbelief. "Syntax is the architecture of thought, Mr. Godoy," I replied with a half-smile. "And my building is very solid. Proceed, please." I walked out of the bank 40 minutes later. In my purse, I carried the cancellation receipts for 3 credit cards Julian treated as his own, and the confirmation of the freeze on the savings account. I had left only one active checking account for my expenses, armored with passwords only I knew. The silent execution had begun. Julian wouldn't get a phone call from me, screaming, "No!" He would find out in the worst way possible, the next time he tried to swipe that card. On my way home, I stopped by the market. I bought fresh flowers, a good cut of beef, and a bottle of red wine. If I was going to be alone, I was going to be in excellent company with myself. When I got back, Bobby was already done. The new deadbolts gleamed under the midday sun, golden and impenetrable. I paid him gladly and gave him a handsome tip. "Thanks, ma'am. If that Julian guy tries to force it, the door will hold. It's reinforced steel." I locked myself inside my fortress. I spent the afternoon cleaning, but not like before. I wasn't scrubbing to erase my existence. I was claiming my territory. I gathered all the things Julian had left around the house over the years. Boxes of old car magazines, high school soccer trophies he loved looking at with nostalgia, and clothes Chloe had conveniently forgotten in my closet because her apartment was too small. I stuffed it all into black trash bags. I didn't throw them away. I left them stacked on the porch, right next to the front door, like a barricade of dead memories. At 7 p.m., the phone started ringing. I let it ring 1, 2, 3 times. Then it stopped. 10 minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was him. I put it on silent. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my reading chair, opening a copy of Time's Don Quixote. I was on the chapter where the nobleman fights the windmills. Julian always thought I was a windmill, something static he could use to grind his grain. He had no idea I was the giant. The sound of an engine braking hard outside pulled me from my reading. I peeked through the curtain without turning on the living room light so they wouldn't see me. It was Julian's car. He slammed the door shut. Chloe stayed inside, doing her makeup in the rearview mirror, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Julian marched up to the door with determined steps, carrying that arrogance of someone who thinks they own the world. I watched him stick the key in the lock. He turned it. Nothing. He pushed the door a little and tried again. Nothing. I saw him pull the key out, look at it with a frown, blow on it like it had dust on it, and shove it back in. He wrestled with it. Frustration started tightening his shoulders. "Mom!" he yelled, slapping the wood with his palm. "Mom, open up. The key doesn't work." I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the living room, wine glass in hand, watching the scene unfold like someone watching a play. I was no longer Mom. I was Eleanor. Respect vanishes. The second convenience disappears. "I know you're in there. Open the door." Chloe rolled down the car window. "What's wrong, babe?" she asked in her shrill voice. "It won't open. The old bat changed the locks," he roared, kicking the base of the door. That kick hurt me. Not physically, but in the soul of the house. I decided it was time for an indirect confrontation. I wouldn't open the door, but I would make my presence known. I flipped the porch light switch from the inside. Julian blinked, blinded by the sudden glare. Then, I walked over to the side window, the one with the wrought iron bars, and cracked the glass just a few inches. "Good evening, Julian," I said. My voice sounded calm, a stark contrast to his heavy breathing. "Mom, what is wrong with you? Why did you change the locks? I need to get in. I left some important papers in Grandpa's desk." A lie. There were no papers. He was just looking for the checkbook I used to keep there. "There are no papers of yours here, son," I replied. "The only things of yours left in this house are in those black bags right at your feet." Julian looked down and saw the garbage bags. He kicked one, and it ripped open, spilling his old sports magazines all over the welcome mat. "Are you crazy?" he screamed, stepping up to the window. "Chloe was right. The dementia is hitting you hard. Open this door right now or I'm kicking it down. If you touch that door one more time, I will call the police," I warned him, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He knew I was tight with half the precinct from my years as a neighborhood association leader, even though he always mocked my little old lady meetings. "And as for your papers, I suggest you check your email. The bank sent you some very interesting notifications today." Julian went pale under the yellow porch light. "The bank. What did you do?" "I did exactly what a responsible guardian would do," I said, savoring the irony. "I protected a vulnerable person's assets from predators. The cards are canceled, Julian. The power of attorney is revoked, and the joint account. Well, let's just say it's a solo act now." "You can't do this to me," he shrieked, his voice cracking into a ridiculous squeak. "I have debts. The Turk is going to kill me if I don't pay him tomorrow. I need to withdraw cash today." There it was. The truth, floating to the surface, like oil on water. The Turk. My suspicions confirmed. It wasn't an investment. It wasn't a business. It was gambling debts and shady loans. I felt a sharp pang of fear for him. The maternal instinct screaming at me to run, unlock the door, give him the cash, and save him. My hands shook, and I almost dropped my glass. "He's my son," one part of me screamed. "He's your executioner," replied the other, the one with a college degree and calluses on her knees. I took a deep breath. If I saved him now, I would condemn him forever, and I would condemn myself to poverty. "That is a problem you will have to solve with your own intellect, Julian," I said, hardening my heart as if it were a tough stain to scrub out. "You have 2 arms, 2 legs, and supposedly a private education that cost me 20 years of scrubbing toilets. Use it." "Mom, please?" He started crying, or at least faking it, pressing his face against the iron bars of the window. "They are dangerous. I just need $50,000. I'll pay you back next month. No, I said, the shortest and hardest word in the English language. Go away, Julian. Take your trash and don't come back until you've learned how to read. Read what? He screamed, in utter desperation. To read reality, I sentenced. I shut the window and pulled the heavy velvet curtain closed. I listened to him pounding on the glass, cursing, listening to Chloe step out of the car screaming insults no lady should even know. I stood in the middle of the living room, my heart hammering in my throat like a trapped bird. I waited 5, 10, 15 minutes. Finally, I heard the engine start and the tires screech as they drove off. The silence returned to the house, but it was different now. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a battlefield right after the first cannon fires. I collapsed into my armchair. I was exhausted. My old hands ached from the tension. But then I looked at the coffee table. There was my ledger. I picked it up, and with my green pen, I wrote a new entry under today's date. Day 1 of independence. Cost, 1 son. Profit, my dignity. Balance, in the black. I knew this wasn't over. The Turk was a real threat, and Julian's desperation would make him dangerous. Chloe wouldn't just sit on her hands, either. She was the one pulling the strings of my son's ambition. They would definitely try something legal, or something illegal. I had to be ready. Tomorrow wouldn't be a cleaning day. Tomorrow would be an investigation day. I had to find out who this Turk was, and see if there was any legal way to armor the house so that even if I died, they couldn't touch it to pay for their vices. I finished my wine in one gulp. The taste of grapes and oak warmed my chest. All right, Eleanor, I said out loud to myself. You've cried for the boy he was. Now, fight the man he is. I turned off the light and went to sleep. With my university degree watching over my dreams from the nightstand, and the absolute certainty that for the first time in my life, I was the one steering my own ship. 3 days. That was the exact amount of time it took for hunger to conquer pride. For 72 hours, my house was a silent, perfumed bunker, smelling of freshly brewed coffee and wood polish. From my window, safely hidden behind the lace curtains I crocheted 20 years ago, I watched Julian and Chloe's car parked on the curb across the street. They slept in there like 2 stray dogs waiting for the butcher to take pity and toss them a bone. Every once in a while, Chloe would step out, smooth down her wrinkled skirt, and glare at my front door with a mix of pure hatred and sheer desperation. Julian, on the other hand, barely moved from the driver's seat. He just rested his head against the steering wheel, utterly defeated by his own incompetence. The phone had stopped ringing. There were no more screams or threats. The silence outside was actually heavier than the noise, because it signaled the final storm. I knew the Turk's deadline was up. Today, I woke up early, took a cold shower to brace my nerves, and got dressed. I didn't pick out house clothes. I put on a crisp, starched, high-collared white blouse and a straight black skirt. I pinned a cameo brooch to my collar, the only piece of jewelry they hadn't stolen from me, because I kept it hidden inside an empty tea tin in the pantry. I pulled my white hair back into a severe bun and looked in the mirror. Eleanor Vance, Bachelor of Arts. I whispered to my reflection. Today you aren't scrubbing grime. Today, you are scrubbing consciences. I walked out of the house at 9 a.m. sharp. When I unlocked the reinforced door, the metallic clack of the deadbolts made Julian's head snap up inside the car. He stumbled out, his shirt stained, a 3-day shadow of a beard darkening his face, making him look like an urban castaway. "Mom!" he yelled, running toward the gate, but stopping dead when he saw I had zero intention of opening it. "Mom! For God's sake! You have to help us! We haven't had a hot meal in 2 days!" Chloe is sick to her stomach. Chloe dragged her feet out of the car. There was no arrogance left in her posture, just exhaustion and fear. "Mrs. Eleanor," she started, her voice cracking. "Please, we just want to use the bathroom." I looked at them through the black iron bars. I felt like a school principal looking down at two expelled students. "There are public restrooms at the gas station on the corner," I said coldly. "And as for food, I recall that when I was sick with pneumonia last year, you, Chloe, told me that fasting was a great way to purify the body. Take your own medicine." Julian grabbed the bars in desperation. "Stop giving us moral lectures," he roared, though his eyes were brimming with tears. "The Turk called me an hour ago. He said if I don't have the cash by noon, he's coming for the house. He says he has a signed promissory note where I put the property up as collateral. They're going to come kick you out on the street, Mom. Understand?" There it was, the full confession. He had mortgaged my roof, my history, my hydrangeas, everything, all for a poker table. I felt a sharp stab of pain in my chest, but I drowned it instantly with the memory of my diploma. Emotion clouds judgment, reason sharpens it. "No one is going to kick me out of here, Julian," I replied, adjusting my glasses, "because I never signed anything." "But I forged your signature," he screamed, immediately slapping a hand over his mouth, realizing the colossal mistake he had just made. I smiled, a tiny, icy smile. "Thank you for confessing that in front of witnesses, son." I nodded toward Patty, who was sweeping the sidewalk next door and had conveniently stopped sweeping just to listen better. "But don't worry about the Turk. I'm going to see him right now." "What?" Julian's eyes went wide. "He'll kill you. He's a criminal, Mom. He's not some college professor you can just debate with." "Criminality, Julian, also has its codes. And you broke the most important one. Never bet what isn't yours." I clicked the remote to open the electric driveway gate. I pulled out my old sedan, the one Julian kept telling me was broken so I wouldn't drive it, but that Bobby fixed yesterday in under an hour, and backed out into the street. I left them standing right there on the sidewalk, watching the useless old lady drive straight into the wolf's den. The Turk's operation wasn't in some dark alley. It was in the back of a pawn shop downtown, behind a curtain of plastic beads that clicked when you walked through. The place smelled like stale tobacco and hopelessness. I walked in with a firm step, clutching my purse with my fountain pen and a leather folder inside. Two massive guys with crossed arms and mean faces blocked my path. "Lady, you got the wrong place. We don't sell rosaries here," one of them sneered. "I am looking for Mr. Sal Santoro," I said, using my orator's voice, projecting from my diaphragm so it echoed across the room. "Tell him that Mrs. Vance is here to discuss the foreclosure on the Oakwood Heights property." The gorillas looked at each other. The formal tone threw them off. One of them stepped into an office in the back, came out a minute later, and motioned for me to go in. Sal, the Turk, Santoro, was a man in his 50s, bald, wearing gold rings on 3 fingers, with sharp, predatory eyes. He was sitting behind a desk covered in messy paperwork. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked, looking me up and down skeptically. Julian didn't tell me he had a lawyer, let alone one who looks like my great-aunt. I didn't sit down. I stood right in front of his desk, claiming my space. "I am not his lawyer, Mr. Santoro. I am his mother, and I am also the sole and rightful owner of the house that idiot promised you." The Turk let out a dry laugh. "Look, lady, I respect your gray hair, but business is business. Your son signed a document. He put the house up as collateral. If he doesn't pay up today, my lawyers and my associates are taking possession. That's how the world works. That's how the world of the ignorant works." I cut him off. "But you don't strike me as an ignorant man, Mr. Santoro. I see a copy of Times Crime and Punishment Times on your shelf. A man who reads Dostoevsky should know that there is no such thing as a perfect crime." The man stopped smiling. He glanced at the book, then looked back at me with renewed interest. "What do you want?" I pulled a document out of my folder. It wasn't money. It was a certified copy from the county recorder's office, pulled off the internet yesterday and printed at the corner shop, along with a copy of the judge's ruling from 3 days ago confirming my full legal and mental capacity. This document, I said, placing the paper on his desk softly but firmly, proves that the property has been under a homestead exemption for 30 years. It is unalienable, exempt from seizure, and off the market. Furthermore, my will specifies a life estate. Julian cannot sell it, mortgage it, or give it away. His signature on your promissory note is worth less than toilet paper. The Turk snatched the document and read it fast. He frowned. He showed me a deed, he muttered. An old deed, and most likely doctored, I replied. Mr. Santoro, you can try to execute that foreclosure. But if you do, I will file criminal charges for procedural fraud, forgery, and extortion. I am 74 years old, sir. I am not afraid of prison or threats or death, but you have a business to lose. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the wood of his desk. Besides, I happen to know your daughter Layla is in her first semester of Hispanic literature at the State University. It would be a terrible shame if she found out her father was trying to scam one of the most decorated alumni of her very own college. Academic circles are incredibly small, Sal. Prestige takes years to build and only seconds to destroy. End quote. The Turk froze. Mentioning his daughter was the masterstroke. It wasn't a physical threat. It was a threat to his legacy, to the only clean part of his life. There was a tense silence, broken only by the hum of an old desk fan. The Turk looked into my eyes, searching for fear, but all he found was the steel determination of a woman who had scrubbed floors on her knees and read Cervantes on her feet. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. That son of yours is a lying rat, he said, his tone shifting from threatening to disgusted. He swore to me you were senile, and the house was his. My son is a parenting mistake that I am trying to correct rather late in the game, I admitted. But the debt is real, isn't it? He took your money, $50,000, plus interest. I propose a deal, I said, pulling out my Parker fountain pen. Forget the extortionate interest. Julian will pay back the principal capital. $50,000 exactly. You got the cash? He asked, hopeful. I don't. He does, I replied. Julian is going to work. I know you run a loading dock down at the wholesale market. You need strong backs. Julian has one. Let him work for you. Garnish his wages until he pays off every last cent. If he misses a day, if he steals a dime, you call me, and then I will walk him into the police precinct myself. The Turk looked at me with a mix of disbelief and sheer admiration. You want me to put your spoiled brat to work hauling crates of tomatoes at 4:00 inches the morning? I want my son to learn what it costs to earn a living, Mr. Santoro. I want him to sweat out every dollar he threw away on cards. Deal! The Turk let out a short laugh, almost a snort. He grabbed the fake promissory note, ripped it into 4 pieces, and extended his hand. Deal, Mrs. Vance. Send him to me tomorrow at 4 a.m. And tell him to bring a back brace, because those potato sacks are heavy. I drove home feeling like I was floating. I had defused a nuclear bomb with words and paper. When I pulled up, Julian and Chloe were still there, sitting on the curb under the midday sun, utterly defeated. I stepped out of the car and walked toward them. Chloe stood up fast, wiping her hands on her dress. Julian looked at me in absolute terror, expecting to see the Turk's goons walking up right behind me. What happened? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Did you sell the house? I opened my purse, pulled out the torn pieces of the promissory note, and tossed them at his feet. The wind scattered the scraps of paper like dead leaves. Your debt has been restructured, I said. Julian dropped to his knees to pick up the pieces, in total shock. You paid it, Mom. Thank you. I swear I'm going to change. I swear I'll... Shut up, I ordered. I didn't yell. but the authority in my voice was so absolute, his jaw snapped shut. I didn't pay a single cent, Julian. You are going to pay. Me? But I don't have any money. My accounts are frozen. You have a body, you have your health, and you have 2 hands that haven't done a single useful thing in 40 years. Tomorrow, at 4 a.m., you are reporting to Mr. Santoro's warehouse at the wholesale market. You are going to work as a loader. What? Chloe let out a shriek. Julian can't do that. He has a bad back. That's brute labor. I turned to her slowly. Brute labor, I repeated softly. For 20 years, I hauled 5-gallon buckets of water up endless flights of stairs so your husband could go to a private college. My hands, these brute hands, paid for his designer clothes and his whims. Now, he's going to use his to pay for his mistakes. I looked down at Julian. He was pale, horrified at the prospect of real, physical labor. It's that, or prison for forgery and fraud, I sentenced. I have the police report drafted on my desk. You choose, my son, loader or inmate. Julian lowered his head. Reality crushed him like a concrete slab. For the first time in his entire life, there was no easy way out. There was no mommy's skirt to hide behind. I'll go, he whispered. Good, I said. Now, there are new rules. If you want to come onto this property, it will be on my terms. I pulled a sheet of paper from my purse. It was a basic lease agreement I had typed up the night before. You two will live in the servants' quarters in the backyard. You will pay a symbolic monthly rent, but you will pay it. You will not have access to the main house without an invitation. You will cook your own food and wash your own clothes. And you, Chloe. She glared at me, narrowing her eyes, trying to cling to a shred of dignity. What about me? You are going to return everything you took. The tea set, the pearl earrings, right down to the last embroidered tablecloth. If my things aren't on my dining table by noon tomorrow, I'm changing the lock on the servants' quarters, and you're out on the street. Understood? Chloe pressed her lips together until they turned white, but she nodded. She knew I had the power. She knew the foolish old lady was gone, and an unforgiving matriarch had taken her place. I opened the gate and walked into my garden. I stopped in front of my hydrangeas, plucked a dead leaf, and turned back to them one last time. Oh, and one more thing, I said, brushing the blue petals. Trash TV is over in this house. If you want to have a conversation with me, you will have to read. Every Sunday, we will discuss a book. We're starting with Times, Oedipus Rex. I think you both have a lot to learn about family tragedies and blindness. I walked inside and closed the door. The click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot, but this time, it wasn't a shot of war. It was the sound of victory. I walked over to the window and looked out. Julian was helping Chloe pull suitcases out of the car to drag them to the back room. He was hunched over, not from the weight of the luggage, but from the weight of reality. I went to my desk, picked up my green pen, and opened my notebook. I wrote a single sentence in my perfect, round handwriting. Chapter 4. Lessons are learned the hard way, but understood through hard work. I set the pen down and took a deep breath. The air in the house felt entirely different. It no longer smelled like fear or mothballs. It smelled like fresh ink and justice. For the first time in 74 years, I wasn't a supporting character in my son's life. I was the author of my own novel, and I had just written the greatest plot twist of all. Tomorrow the final transformation would begin. But today I was going to sit in my armchair with a glass of wine and enjoy the show, watching my antagonists learn the hard way that ignorance is expensive, but underestimating a mother costs you your soul. It's been 6 months since the judge banged his gavel and my life as I knew it shattered into pieces, only to be put back together in a new, stronger shape, like those Japanese vases repaired with gold. It's 5 p.m. on a random Sunday. The sun hits my garden at an angle, illuminating the hydrangeas that now boast a vibrant, electric blue because someone is finally fertilizing them properly. That someone is Julian. I watch him walk up from the servants' quarters in the back. He walks differently now. He no longer has that arrogant strut, chest puffed out, taking long strides like he believes the ground isn't worthy of his shoes. Now, he walks with the weight of reality on his shoulders. He's lost weight, he lost his beer belly, and his hands, once soft like a child's, are now covered in calluses and scrapes. Working for the Turk is unforgiving. Hauling sacks of onions at 4 a.m. has taught him more about economics than any class at his private college. He reaches the patio table where I'm waiting with tea poured. He doesn't sit down without asking for permission with his eyes. That is the most radical change, respect. Not respect born of fear, but the kind that comes from recognizing the moral authority of the person sitting across from you. "Good afternoon, Mother," he says, placing a manila envelope on the table. It's his end of the bargain, the weekly cash for the Turk and the symbolic rent for the room. "Good afternoon, Julian. Sit." Aye. Chloe arrives a moment later, carrying a tray of cookies she baked herself. She no longer has those 2-inch acrylic nails. She keeps them short and unpainted now. She got a job as a receptionist at a local dental clinic. She told me quietly that her feet hurt from standing all day, and I just nodded, reminding her that my feet hurt for 40 years so she could have a couch to sit on. "I brought the oatmeal ones for you, Mrs. Eleanor," she says, setting the tray down. "I am no longer the old bat. I am Mrs. Eleanor." "Thank you, Chloe. The silver tea set looks lovely today." She blushes. It took her 2 weeks to return all the pieces she had borrowed. The sugar bowl was the last to show up. She had to buy it back from a pawn shop with her first paycheck. That lesson cost her tears. But she learned that in my house, objects have a memory, and I keep an inventory. We open the book. Today isn't Time's Oedipus Rex. We finished that one. And I saw Julian's eyes well up when we got to the part about the exile. Today is Time's Don Quixote, Chapter 1. Julian reads out loud. His reading has improved. He used to rush through it, skipping pauses, like someone trying to get it over with so he could go watch football. Now, he savors the commas. He understands that rushing is the enemy of comprehension. While he reads about the windmills and the giants, I observe my surroundings. My house is no longer a mausoleum of memories or a cheap motel for ungrateful children. It has become a living thing. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, my living room transforms. I moved the old furniture and brought in a large table. 5 women from the neighborhood come to take classes. They are women just like I was. Invisible, quiet, domestic workers who used to sign their names with an ink thumbprint. Patty, the locksmith's mother, is my star pupil. Yesterday, she read her very first complete note, and she cried, hugging my waist. "You've given me my sight back, Eleanor," she told me. And I felt that the university degree sitting in a drawer was worth far more for what it did at that dining table than for the chancellor's seal. I've become the neighborhood lawyer. People don't come over to borrow sugar anymore. They come to bring me abusive lease agreements, letters from Social Security they don't understand, or their grandkids' homework. I charge my fees in trade, a basket of fruit, a fresh chicken, or simply the attentive silence of someone listening to my advice. I've discovered that power is useless if it stays stagnant. Power is like water. It has to flow toward others, or it rots. And thus, from sleeping little and reading much, his brain dried up. Julian reads, then stops. He looks at me over the top of the book. "Mom, do you think my brain dried up from times not times using it?" The question catches me off guard. I set my teacup down on the saucer with a soft clink. "It didn't dry up, son. It was fallow. Like land left to rest for too long, growing full of weeds. Right now, we are plowing it, and it hurts. The plow always tears the earth, but it's the only way to make something worthwhile grow again." Julian nods and looks down at his battered hands. "The Turk told me today that I'm a hard worker. he murmurs, almost embarrassed. He said if I keep this up, I'll have the principal paid off in a year. He even offered to make me shift manager on Saturdays. And what did you tell him? That I'd think about it, but that I need to finish reading times Don Quixote times with my mother first. Chloe places a hand on his shoulder. There is a new complicity between them. Poverty and hard work have bonded them closer than easy money ever did. Before, they were accomplices in a crime. Now, they are partners in a battle. I look toward the living room window. There, in a simple wooden frame I bought at the market, I finally hung my diploma. It isn't hidden away in the bedroom. It's right by the entrance. It's the very first thing you see when you open the door. The other day, Julian's lawyer, that kid with the shark smile, came by looking for my son regarding an old traffic ticket. When he walked in and saw the degree, he stopped dead in his tracks. Bachelor of Arts? He asked in disbelief. Summa cum laude? I replied from my armchair, without even standing up. And I highly suggest you watch your grammar when speaking to me, young man. Sloppy syntax offends me far more than bad manners. The lawyer left quickly, and Julian, who was sweeping the porch, let out a loud laugh. It was the first time I'd heard him genuinely laugh in years. Not a mocking laugh, but a clean one. Keep reading, son, I order softly. The afternoon fades, and the sky turns violet, the exact same color as the jacaranda trees at the university. I feel fulfilled. Not happy in the euphoric sense of the word, but complete. I have reclaimed my name, my home, and in a strange, painful way, I have reclaimed my son. He isn't the successful hotshot I dreamed of when I was paying his tuition. He's a market loader, living in a servant's quarters. But he is an honest man. And that, I've discovered, is a much harder masterpiece to write than any doctoral thesis. When Julian finishes the chapter, he closes the book carefully. I'll come by earlier tomorrow, he says. I want to patch that leak in the kitchen roof before I head to work. That sounds fine. There are tools in the garage. They stand up to head back to their room. Chloe picks up the tray and tells me goodnight. Right before crossing the yard, Julian turns around. Mom. He hesitates for a second. Thank you. For what? I ask, pulling my shawl tighter. For making you work like a mule? No. He shakes his head, and his eyes meet mine, completely stripped of lies. For not letting me win that day in court. If you had let me declare you incompetent, I think I would have died of disgust with myself sooner or later. You saved me from becoming a monster. He turns around and walks toward the back. I am left alone in the garden. The cool night air brushes my face. I pull my fountain pen from my pocket, that emerald green Parker that served as my sword and my shield. I open my notebook on the wrought iron table. I write the final entry in this war log that slowly turned into a manual for peace. Education isn't just knowing how to read the letters in a book. It is knowing how to read life, knowing how to read people. And above all, having the courage to correct the crooked lines, even when your hand shakes. Today, Eleanor Vance is not just a mother or a widow. She is the author of her own destiny. I close the notebook. The ink shines black and definitive under the moonlight. Tomorrow, I have a class with Patty at 10 a.m. I need to prepare the lesson on future tense verbs, because that is the only thing we have left ahead of us. A tense that, finally, I know how to conjugate on my own terms.